From advertising to software as a service to data.
Across all of our programs and clients, we've seen a 55 to 65% open rate.
Getting brands authentically integrated into content performs better than TV advertising.
Typical lifespan of an article is about 24 to 36 hours.
If we're reaching out to the right person with the right message and a clear call to action, then it's just a matter of timing.
Welcome to the Martech Podcast, a Ben J. Schaap LLC production. In this podcast, you'll hear the stories of world-class marketers that use technology to drive business results and achieve career success. We'll unearth the real-world experiences of some of the brightest minds in the marketing and technology space so you can learn the tools, tips, and tricks they've learned along the way. Now here's the host of the Martech Podcast, Benjamin Shapiro.
Welcome back to the Martech Podcast. It's just you and me today, marketers. And for those of you who are new to the Martech Podcast community, in this episode, like we do at the end of every month, I'm going to tell you how we practice what we preach in the marketing of this show. Well, we're more than halfway through the first quarter of the year, and things are feeling like they're really getting off to a running start this year. As we do each month, I want to start off this podcast by restating some of the things that me and my teams are trying to accomplish in the production of the Martech Podcast. We set up our goals in two different ways. We have our non-quantifiable and our quantifiable goals. In terms of our non-quantifiable goals, we're trying to get a better understanding of who our listeners are. We're trying to mitigate some of our risks by cultivating new growth channels. We want to add more utility by producing format in multiple different forms of content, like our newsletter and some of our episode summaries. We're trying to evaluate the opportunity of building a podcast network that's larger than just the Martech Podcast. That said, in terms of the quantifiable goals that we're trying to reach, we're trying to hit 100,000 download per month run rate before the end of the year. We want to collect $100,000 in Martech sponsorship revenue, reaching out to 100 different networking conversations to schedule our guests. And we want to launch a new podcast and potentially even revive an old one that we started before. So now that we've talked about our goals, there's a few things that I want to cover today in terms of the making, production, and marketing of this show. First off, I'm happy to announce that we have reached a major milestone. As of today, recording this on February 28th, the Martech Podcast has been downloaded over 100,000 times. All right, so big milestone. Nice to feel like the podcast is now in the six-figure club. I wish that was the monthly download rate, but thinking that 100,000 downloads have happened in less than a year makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. So thank you all for being a part of that. Achieving that figure, it means a ton to me, and we're excited to continue to scale the show and bring you more great Martech podcast content. But celebrations aside, I want to talk to you about how the show is trending this month. We're going to start off by talking a little bit about what happened last month, where the show was downloaded 17,500 times, which was a whopping 59% month-over-month growth. That's coming off of December, which was a month where we didn't publish a full month of content and we didn't have any advertising. So 59% growth sounds like a great number, but it was also coming off a slower month because it was the end of the year. And in last month, we upped our budget from $0 to $4,000. So obviously that was a contributing factor for the large growth. That said, going into this month, my plan was to continue our spending while recognizing that we're heading into the shortest month of the year. We only had 28 days to drive podcast downloads. So it was going to be near impossible to achieve the same growth rate that we had last month and hard to even top the total download numbers. So how'd we do? Well, let's just say we didn't crack the 59% growth rate. That's not a real surprise. And it looks like we're going to land somewhere in between 18,500 and 19,000 downloads, which is just around a 5% growth rate. That said, since we're comparing a month with 31 days to a month with 28 days, it's not an apples to apples comparison. So a 5% growth rate doesn't sound like much, but when you look at our average download per day, we grew from 565 downloads per day to 660, which is a 17% growth rate, which is much more in line with the growth rates that we've seen blended over a longer period of time. Truthfully, my hope for this month was to get to 20,000 downloads, and it looks like we're going to have to wait until March till we get there, but we hit our 100,000 download mark. That was a key milestone. I'm really excited about achieving that. So In terms of our marketing mix for the month, I invested a total of $4,600 in marketing across 4 paid channels. And those channels are our tried and true dynamic advertising on podcasts through a platform called Knit, Knit. We invested $2,000 in Knit. And generally, like we did the previous month, we try to put more money into Knit than any other channel. And we did that, but not by much. $2,000 for Knit, and that's really our workhorse. The reason why we didn't invest more into Knit this month was I wanted to test some other growth channels. So we put $600 into advertising into another podcast platform called Overcast. And Overcast presents display advertising, banner advertising in their app. So these are podcast listeners that are seeing the banner ads while they're listening to podcasts. So we put a $600 investment into Overcast. It generated 60,000 views, which resulted in 1,700 engagements, a click basically. It rounds out to be about a 35% CPC, which really sounds like it's a pretty good mark. The issue that I have with the Overcast platform is that we only generated 66 subscriptions. So while there were 1,700 clicks, the conversion rate from click to subscriber was relatively low. Their CPA worked out to be roughly $9, which is significantly more than what we're paying using dynamic insertion by putting audio content into other podcasts through Knit. So I think we'll probably double back to Overcast down the road. I want to test to see what the lift is, but it took a month to be able to spend the $600 in our campaign, and I just didn't see a big burst. I didn't see a big signal, so not necessarily a platform that we're going to double back on right now. We tested another platform at the end of this month, and we haven't really seen the full result of it, but we're testing some ads using a platform that's similar to Knit in the sense that it's dynamic insertion, but it's not in podcast advertising. It's in a newsletter. We're testing an ad on the platform called the Inside Newsletter. You can go to inside.com to see their series of newsletters, and we invested $1,000 into targeting people that the Inside team knows are marketers. The rates are $25 CPMs, which feels pretty expensive to me, but it was a relatively small buy, so that was a rate that we were okay with investing to get a test to understand if there is a heartbeat for that channel. I don't really have a full report on how the campaign performed because we only started it at the beginning of this week, so we've had 4 days worth of traction. And so far, we've seen some pretty good results this week. Now, whether that is being specifically driven by the Inside newsletter or whether that's just the growth of the show, it's a little difficult to say. So no news yet to report, but I'm optimistic that the Inside newsletter channel is one that we're going to be able to rely on in addition to our primary growth channel, which is the Knit advertising. The last channel that we invested in was an App Store optimization platform that I'm not going to say the name of because I don't necessarily feel great about the performance of the channel. I don't want other people investigating it. We invested $3,000 a month into getting the Martech podcast to rank in the Apple iTunes store. And unfortunately, this is a channel that we had tested for a month before, and we saw some pretty promising results initially. And we tried to make a longer term commitment. And what happened was that they're stating that Apple has updated their terms of service or Apple's made changes to how they rank people in their app store. We had a commitment that we would be ranking in the top 75 in the business category, and we weren't able to maintain that position. So at the end of the day, our App Store optimization ended up netting nothing, and we're trying to recoup the budget from that campaign. So it's a pretty frustrating experience. You win some, you lose some. We tested this channel. I thought it was going to work, and it turns out it didn't. So at the end of the day, we landed around 18,500 downloads. And if you discount the $1,500 we spent for App Store optimization, that nets out to a budget of $3,100, which is a blended rate of 17 cents per download. And when you look at the cost per new download, it was around $3.10. That's actually a lot more than we've paid for our downloads over the last few months, but we were testing some new channels and we didn't see some great results from some campaigns, and I'm optimistic that we'll be able to optimize it next month as we get back to focusing on the Knit platform. So to try to put this in perspective, if you look back over our growth rate over the last 6 months, we averaged a growth rate that was somewhere between 18 to 20%, depending on whether you're looking at the growth per month or the growth of the number of subscribers that we're seeing on a daily basis. So somewhere around 20% has been our month over month growth rate for a 6-month period. If we're sitting at 18,500 downloads right now, and we apply somewhere between an 18 to 20% growth rate, it looks like our trajectory for the end of the year is between 90 and 100,000 downloads per month. So the moral of the story is that based on what we're doing so far with our performance, I feel like we're tracking to reach our audience growth goals for 2019, so I'm optimistic. Now, in terms of our monetization strategies, our plan was to target growth stage B2B SaaS companies that were already doing awareness-based marketing activities like events, radio, and advertising on other podcasts. We sold all of our Q1 ad inventory and some advertorial placements for a total of $27,000 going into Q1. And since we were able to sell the vast majority of our inventory quickly before the quarter started, and seeing that our listenership has nearly doubled this quarter, we decided to raise our rates. So my expectation is that we're going to bring on more advertisers for shorter deals because the vast majority of the advertisers that are coming to us are asking to spend somewhere between $5,000 and $15,000 for a month to a quarter long sponsorship. So my hope is that by raising the rates, we're able to A, invest more in marketing and continue to increase our audience and over deliver for our advertisers. But we're also going to be able to increase the monetization for the podcast. Last thing, my team is working on scaling its content production capabilities. So we're to the point where we're publishing MarTech podcasts as a daily show, 5 days a week. We have our content already booked, most of it recorded all the way through April. So we have a lot of content that we're pumping out. We're starting to think about producing content in other formats like newsletters and engaging in social media, shorter form content. We're also trying to work on helping other podcast producers create content, thinking about spinning out other shows to be able to sell more advertising inventory. So we've been working, we've been hustling. I want to, as always, thank my production team who's created a great amount of content. Thanks to our guests who are willing to share their expertise. And specifically, thanks to you, our listeners, for lending your ears, for helping us achieve our goals. We hit 100,000 downloads per month. I am really excited. We're growing our business. 2019 is off to a great start. I'm optimistic that we're going to keep growing, and we're really excited to bring you more great MarTech podcast content. So thanks again. We're excited to hit our big milestone this month. And as always, until next time, my advice is to just focus on keeping your customers happy.